Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Meeting Protocol Monthly Podcast, where we chat with some of the coolest people in the business and bring you useful and relevant information about what's happening in the world of meeting planning. I am Dora Figueredo, the head of events and education at Meeting Protocol, coming to you from New Jersey. And please excuse my nasally voice as I am getting over the flu, which seems to be hitting a lot of folks right now. So it wasn't until fairly recently that I considered how transferable the skills from TV production and event production could be. It started when I took an online course aimed at event managers that drew connections between the production crew on a Broadway play and the work that we did as managers of large and complex events. The instructor showed us a behind the scenes video of the person calling all of the camera shots at an award show, and it blew my mind because I truly had never ever put those two things together. It made me see live theater and TV in a completely new light, and it got me thinking about just how similar the work really is, even though I personally don't think I could make the jump to TV as I love events so much, and also not all of the skills are transferable. Some of them are learned. So both roles require meticulous project management, coordinating multiple teams and vendors, managing budgets, adhering to timelines, creative visioning, problem solving on the fly, and ensuring a seamless experience for the audience and attendees, and more. So these are like sort of, I think, baseline things that we do in events and presumably also in TV. Today's guest is profoundly knowledgeable in this area as he started his career in TV production and radio before moving to events. He has an impressive and varied background with so many cool roles that I just cannot name in a quick intro. He's managed film and music festivals from the University of Notre Dame to Philadelphia to Sundance and more, managed digital managed digital strategy at Showtime, is such an expert in strategic communications that he literally taught a university course and guided the New York City mayor's office, coordinated logistics for the DNC. Like truly, I can just go on and on. So check out his LinkedIn profile after the episode and get as impressed as I am. I was so grateful when he reached out to me actually because I'm so excited to introduce all of you to him. So welcome to Liam Dacey, currently a principal at Stern Consulting LLC, where he specializes in consulting for nonprofit event strategies and around advocacy issues. So thank you so much, Liam, for being with us today. Tell us where you're joining from, and yeah.
Well, thanks for that nice introduction, Dora. I am joining you from Boca Raton, Florida, which normally I would say like warm, sunny Florida, but it's actually like really cold in Florida this time of year in January. And I think there's actually snow in like the northern part of the state, so it's still moderately warm in South Florida, but it's not beach weather,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
it's
But probably
historic.
warmer than where you are, Dora.
Yes, it's like 28 degrees today, so I would take
Yes.
anything above freezing right now.
Yeah. Um,
So in high school and college, you were on track to go into the TV and film industry. Tell us about your training here and how that turned into what became your event experience.
Yeah, so as you were mentioning in high school, I took this course. This is, I'm 42, so this is going back a little ways, but I took a course at a local access TV station with my father, and they kind of taught us how to create a TV program. This was before YouTube. This was in a different communication age in the late 1990s. But I took the course and it was actually free and open to anyone to have their own television program. So at age like 16 and 17, I decided to have this variety show that I decided it was more fun to do it live. So, which added a whole nother like complexity to everything. But a lot of the skills like you were talking about with events, really, I didn't know it at the time, but were the same skills I was using to create this program because I had to develop a concept. I had to hire a crew, create different positions, develop a kind of run of show of what was going to happen with the program, and then troubleshoot, when things inevitably went wrong. So it was a great kind of training ground for what I did in the future. And then in college at Notre Dame, I was a film production major, so I kind of took the TV thing and kind of made it into TV and film. With film, especially, we were actually shooting on 16 millimeter film at the time and splicing our film together kind of the old-fashioned way. With film, it's even more critical to do the like kind of the production management and really managing every amount of time that you're shooting because it costs money, first of all, to have, with film as opposed to digital to shoot. So we had to make sure that everything was very carefully planned, kind of on our script and on our run of show and cue sheet, even to a greater extent. So that got me into kind of learning about, you know, positions, different licenses you might need to shoot in different places, different, kind of, expenses that go in with production. So it was a lot of this kind of pre-event planning, productions skills that I learned at Notre Dame, which were pretty cool. But it was a very intensive program, and anyone who knows who was shot on like real film, it's a little scary because once you start rolling the film, that costs money, and you don't want to do 10 takes of one scene. So a lot of those types of skills I learned pretty early on.
That's great. So, I would say that, I mean, personally, without knowing you that well, I want to say your crowning achievement in college was the Queer Film Festival that you spearheaded. So first of all, absolutely tremendous achievement. You really started a movement. Can you tell us a little bit about that film festival? And I think you had not done any festival work before that, right? You just kind of dove right in and learned as you went.
Yeah, so I mean, I was at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is probably the most, one of the more Catholic schools of all the Catholic schools in the country. Kind of, some people compare it to the Vatican, and I came out as gay there. So, that at the time they didn't allow like an LGBTQ student group on campus. They didn't have an like officially approved LGBTQ alumni group, but there were a lot of support, a lot of people I found for support there, and kind of being one of the few people that was openly LGBTQ on campus. Those of us who were really banded together. So, and also the alumni sometimes who were openly gay or lesbian would come back to campus, and meet with us, and we would kind of talk about some productive things that we could do, and kind of work around, the landscape of Notre Dame to create some positive change. So what we did, and this was like literally, I think it was at Starbucks, we were just talking, and I think I just said, well, maybe we should have a film festival because I was a film major after all, and it seemed like, maybe we could get some progressive, films together. I think maybe like, shows like Queer as Folk were on back then, so that might have inspired us. But we started kind of shooting around this idea and figuring out how we could do it. And some of the alumni offered to financially support this. They had some connections with other filmmakers in the industry. And some people we were just lucky about. I mean, we had John Cameron Mitchell, who did Hedwig and the Angry Inch, who starred and directed in the movie and was also in the play, that eventually went to Broadway. He was raised Catholic, and gay, so he said, "You know what? I'll come for free." So we didn't even have to pay him. He came. We really figured out as a team, how we could get this going. So we had, a few of us were co-founders. I was one of the co-founders, and then again, it was getting back into like the production mindset of like, okay, like how are we going to get this going, right? We had to find academic co-sponsors to co-sponsor the event, which under academic freedom, the administration allowed us to do, because it was, Notre Dame is one of the top universities in the country, so they, kind of had an obligation to let their students, especially if it was sponsored by an academic department, do a program. So we put together this whole, 3 or 4 day event, and we had different job responsibilities for different people. And one person was the hospitality person who was going to take the filmmakers around town and be their kind of point of contact. Somebody else was in charge of, the ticketing and all of those operations. Another person was in charge of the parties and the special events. So again, just like any event, some of these duties fall into place. and yeah, it was the first film festival I'd ever been a part of. But it was a real success. We also had a media kind of PR component as well because it did raise some eyebrows. So we had the Fox News channel come and they were broadcasting live from campus and actually did a fairly supportive coverage, I thought, of the film festival. And then we were on the front page of the Chicago Tribune as well. So it was definitely a cool experience. It went on for a couple years, and it's something that now Notre Dame does have an approved LGBTQ student group, and they've made a lot of positive changes, fortunately, and steps in the right direction. But back then, it was just kind of giving kind of a voice and giving some visibility to a group that didn't have very much visibility.
It's amazing. Honestly, this story was like just as good the second time around. I know you told me this a few weeks ago. I think this is absolutely amazing. Just the almost like tenacity, the perseverance of like doing this absolutely giant thing that you've never done before. I because you hadn't had the experience in the past for it, like you said that some of the gay alumni came back, gay and lesbian alumni came back, and they had some connections. Like, had they done work like this before, or were all of you just sort of like almost like a support group together, learning together and building together?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us were learning together for the first time. There was one alum who had a lot of experience with like, kind of Hollywood. He was kind of like he's kind of like a celebrity gossip columnist type person, and he had a lot of connections. And he had done this work, and he actually did a panel during that festival that was like kind of like about closeted people in Hollywood. And he ran a panel at the time, so he had the experience, but the rest of us didn't. But it was, I think some of the faculty, the film and TV faculty who were there, they helped kind of consult and guide what we were doing because they had experience at least with film productions, and this essentially was just another production. So, in terms of the careful planning and details that had to go into something like that, but for me, it was a little. Back then too, it was a little like, do I email this like kind of famous movie director directly? Do I call them? It was a little scary because you didn't know how to approach some of these people. And then, but I kind of wanted to make sure that everyone who came had a really good experience coming, and everyone had a very positive experience. So that was kind of top of mind for me. But to me, it just showed the value of teamwork and really, no one person could have done that. It was really like that's teamwork makes the dream work, right? Cliche line, but true. And that really showed the power of a really good team behind a great cause and kind of what an event can do, right? What an event can really change, move the needle. It can create positive change and really be memorable. And a lot of people still remember that film festival.
Yeah. When I looked it up online, I saw that the festival was eventually shut down in 2009, but then came back in 2017. It's a pretty long hiatus. I assume for sort of political reasons, potentially within the university. Were you involved in any of the later iterations? And, what was it like to see it come back?
Yeah, it was great to see it come back. It came back kind of under a different for different reasons probably than for the reasons that we started it, but it came back and one of the professors actually who was helpful in helping it come back, she reached out to me and we had some conversations about kind of what we had done and getting the academic co-sponsors and that sort of thing. But the great thing for me to see was that a new group of students were running it, right? That they were, the torch had been kind of handed off to them to help run it. It wasn't as much that it was shut down as it was just kind of sidelined, and you really need a group of people who are really dedicated to make sure something like that, especially when there's a lot of red tape right around things. So it was really nice to see it come back and then to also see a lot of other positive change on campus come along with it, with the creation of an LGBTQ student group. And it seems like it's rewarding to see that now and to still get to talk to students and talk to people. I did go back to campus in 2019 and talked about my experience, and it was a cool time to kind of talk about the historical aspect of the festival and where it came in line with the transformation of Notre Dame.
That's great. You're always, you know that you're always going to be part of this really historic moment in the university, and I just think that's really amazing. After graduating, you didn't go directly into the in the entertainment industry. What did you do next?
Yeah, so I think hindsight's 2020, and if I had to do college again, I probably would have done I would have double majored in business or something like that and gotten my MBA as well, but can't go back to those years. So I graduated. I was a little uncertain about what I was going to do, but luckily, one of the people who came for that queer film festival also was an executive director of a nonprofit in Philadelphia. It was called Equality Forum, and he asked me to come on later the year after I graduated. So, in the beginning of 2005, I started as kind of a operations coordinator, but it was helping him plan a large event that was a week long. Basically, symposium conference on LGBTQ issues, where he was bringing together leaders from the community across the country to Philadelphia to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the LGBTQ civil rights movement. So my job was supposed to be kind of limited in scope since this was like the first job I had out of college. But we were a small organization, and what happened was a couple of the other people involved had to leave or kind of reduce their responsibilities for various reasons. So the job that I was kind of in charge of at the end was planning this street festival and then a Cyndi Lauper concert after the festival.
It's
So
like
just
not
a
a
Cyndi
small
Lauper
ask.
concert. That's all. Yeah, small ask. And do it with a group of volunteers. I didn't have any paid staff. So the first lesson there was the importance of like working with the city on permitting. That's one thing I learned because in Philadelphia, we were doing a street festival that was in front of the Independence Visitor Center and the Liberty Bell. And then so it was on like National Park Service, and it was also on like the city municipal kind of territory. So we had to deal with a lot of different entities to coordinate our event. We had several meetings with the managing director's office of the city and figuring out we had to move the Cyndi Lauper concert. It was supposed to be in front of the Liberty Bell, and we ended up moving it to Penn's Landing. And I didn't know anything about planning a concert, so like I didn't know what like a writer was, and figuring that out. But again, it was a team, I met a lot of people who were volunteers. I worked with them on the Philadelphia Film Festival that I worked for that year too, and kind of pulled them in. But another cause-driven event, and kind of getting people rallying behind a cause and kind of really engaged in the issue. And that was a great way to motivate people to help out. And at sometimes a lot of them were helping out for free, and kind of getting the job done. But that was a really it was definitely not without we had some event issues, as all events do. We had some kind of oh no event moments because not a lot of us had not done that before. But at the end, everybody was really happy. Cyndi Lauper was very happy. There's one story where she had this long list of food she wanted, and apparently she wasn't really involved in creating her writer, like I think her manager was or something. So she turned to me at the end of the night and she was like, I don't know who writes this list, but I really just want some pizza. Can you order me some pizza? So I ordered like several pizzas for Cyndi Lauper, and she ended up sharing the pizza with everyone else who was backstage at the end of the night, including some of the volunteers and me. So we had this kind of great moment of just eating pizza with Cyndi Lauper, which, doing events, as people know who are probably listening, like you have those little moments like that kind of make it all worth it.
Yeah, it also brings me great joy to hear that Cyndi Lauper actually is as cool as I always imagined her being, and she's not like very mean to the staff and to the volunteers, I think that's great.
Super cool. She came down in a van from New York to Philadelphia for that concert, and then went back the same night. And she came at a very low, she was also invested in the cause because Cyndi Lauper's sister is lesbian, and she's always been very supportive of the community. So I think that's also a lesson about events is kind of rallying people kind of behind a shared goal, right? If you can get them behind a shared goal or really engaged in the cause with the motivation behind the event, you have a much easier time kind of getting people, kind of to be at their best, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Before you said that, I was going to ask you like, what's a really big lesson that you learned while planning this? And it sounds like you had a very good lesson in the end.
I think in retrospect, especially, like I might not have thought of that at the time, but now looking back throughout my career, I'm like, what events have worked and what have been a little more hard to pull off, especially if you're like managing an event team. And I think, yeah, if people aren't fully engaged, enrolled in like kind of what you're doing, it's a little bit, it could be a little more difficult.
Yeah. I also think, earlier you said your age, you're 42. I also am. I think that one of the beautiful things about doing really crazy events at an early age, you were in your 20s, early 20s at that time, is like you don't need as much sleep, and you're just kind of like firing on all cylinders at all times. Like, I'm not sure I could do something like that now, but I think that in my 20s, I would have been excellent if I hadn't been in a different career at the time. Like, I think I actually would have been an even better event planner. Like, now I do need sleep and I do need boundaries between me and work. But in your 20s, you like, you kind of survive without that. And having like a big crazy experience like that is just so infinitely meaningful. And I think that that probably, from my opinion, something like that can really just like set the tone for the rest of your career.
Yeah, I think it's also like holding on to those moments that were at like the moment like right after the event where like it's a real like it's a success, people are happy. It's just that kind of like feeling, kind of like for me, it's like if I can remember that feeling, that helps motivate me through the next event, kind of knowing how to try to get to that moment.
Yeah, that's very true. So like our December guest with Renewal, you have some teaching experience. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I did end up going to grad school. I was working in radio, the radio industry back when there were jobs back then in kind of traditional FM radio. But I want to get my master's in strategic communication management. So I did that at Temple University. And actually, it was pretty cool because I ended up writing my capstone project thesis on, radio, kind of radio listening and if young people were still listening to radio anymore, and if so, why? And this was kind of the advent of like online radio and, iPods and all that sort of thing. So it was an interesting time for the industry. So I was able to kind of, write a capstone project about in my field, which was pretty cool. So the program ended up asking me to teach a course in organizational communications, which I did as I was working as well. So it was kind of a cool experience to get to teach because I think when you teach different concepts, especially at like the undergraduate university level, you end up learning a lot more about what you're teaching. So we were talking about organizational communications, and this was actually, I remember one semester in particular, it was during the March on Wall Street, or I think it was the what was it called? The
Occupy Wall Street?
Occupy, thank you, Occupy Wall Street. And out the window, there were literally the Occupy Wall Street protesters around Philadelphia City Hall for like 6 months or 8 months. So, we're talking about like organizational communications and leadership development. So we could kind of talk about a current event that was happening and like how they were organizing and how they were communicating and how they were maybe some positives and negatives about their approach and like literally right out the window. So it was kind of a cool, a cool moment. And I think with teaching, it's just, we're all, I think no matter what we're doing, if you're leading a team, you're also teaching. So like kind of, it's a similar, you might not be in front of like a PowerPoint presentation, or maybe you will be in front of a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know, but it's communicating to people in a way that they can understand and relate to. So there's some creativity there about like using current events and I actually incorporate a lot of films. Like I use the movie Office Space in my course, which again, late 90s classic. I think late 90s.
Yeah.
So, kind of or The Office, the show The Office, so I was using some things that I'm more familiar with in my background in the course and using that creativity, but then just being relatable and strategic in the way that you're teaching.
So here, it's interesting that you went back and studied organizational communications when a minute ago you said, in hindsight, maybe I should have double majored in business. And I actually wonder, like, how has that degree helped you?
Yeah, it's helped in the sense of so I got my master's of science, so it's an MS, so that's like a heavy like research component. So it kind of in a way it's a quasi marketing degree because it was strategic communication management and PR. So in terms of marketing, PR, crisis management was actually one of my courses. PR, like media management, communications and law, and talking about like legal elements. All of those things actually are very transferable into event work, really. I think that especially the crisis communications course, in what we learned in that course was like coming up with a crisis audit for your organization. So for events, one thing I like to do is do like a crisis audit kind of shortly before the event with the people involved, some of the stakeholders of my production team, and just kind of go through every single thing that could go wrong, and then write contingency plans or write a plan of how we would respond to each thing. So like I've worked on a lot of film festivals. And it's great to do it before a film festival because you can outline, and then if something, God forbid, does go wrong during the festival, you have a plan of how to respond to it. So like certain things like that have been very helpful. And then just getting the kind of having the master's degree has just kind of, I think it just helped in terms of maybe some job application, maybe not. I don't really know. I don't know if it's helped in terms of job applications or not, but it was an achievement and something that I'm proud of, and it just helped me meet a great new network of people when I was living in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's true. I do agree that having a master's degree, especially this day and age, just like saying you have a master's, even if it's not fully aligned necessarily with the job you're applying for, it's kind of like there was a time where people said just having a bachelor's is great because it shows that you can do something for 4 years. And now it's like we've kind of pushed the needle a little bit. Now it's a master's. And you also just recently got your CMP certification, which is yet another layer, and something else to be proud of.
Yeah, and what I noticed when I was studying for the CMP certification was one thing I was like, well, I kind of miss studying. Like, actually, I like studying for things. But the other thing that goes back to the MBA is there's so much business and accounting that's on the CMP exam that you have to study for, and there's a lot of which I didn't have that training in my education, right? Like especially the accounting stuff. So I think a lot of the business side of the events is that's something to keep in mind, and that's something that I had to kind of learn just when studying for the CMP. But again, yeah, the CMP getting that was another feeling of like achievement, and it also there's a lot of other certifications too, right? You can get I actually originally was studying to get the PMP, the project management, but I kind of realized that wasn't really what my background's in. It was I'm more in events and I mean, there is project management as a part of events, but I felt like this was a more appropriate certification to get for my experience and background.
That makes sense. Well, I'm going to move on to your work in the entertainment industry, where you worked in radio promotions at Showtime and for myriad other film festivals across the country. So, my question, what I want to ask you is, did your event experience help you with this work?
Yeah.
And I assume the answer is going to be yes, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how all of these things that are sort of like related but separate, like really align and what kind of skills you gained that you have been able to move between a lot of these roles.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to describe my background to people because I'm like, well, I was in this industry and but they do all have a tie together. So back to when I was living in Philadelphia, I was always interested in radio along with TV and film. It's part of, traditional communications. And actually, when I had my local access TV show, I would sometimes have the local radio DJ host on my show, and then I would go on their show. So there, I always kind of had a little affinity for radio. I was on online radio for a while as a volunteer. So I got a job at one of the major market radio conglomerates in Philadelphia as a assistant promotions director. But there, really, my job was to run hundreds of events a year for the radio station. So I was working with the sales account managers and their clients to generate revenue for the station. And I was also working with the programming team to generate ratings through interactions with listeners, listener events. We had concerts, we had listener appreciation events that were, smaller, some were larger. And then we did a lot of events for clients, in front of, anything from a cell phone store
Mm.
appearance with one of our DJs to, a large, food or music festival or something where we could sell, client booths and things like that. So it was really a wide range of events. And that's kind of where I got my like event shops, I think was in
Okay.
that job because I had to run a couple of event teams of part-time employees. But my job was really making sure they had the tools they needed to execute the event effectively. So a couple of things I learned there. One, you know, I, I had to kind of make sure everyone knew that I was willing to do any job they were willing to do. So the importance of, going to as many of the events as I could, hanging the banners, setting up the PA system, making sure that there was no job that was too small for anyone to do on the team. So that was like one lesson that I learned. And then another one was really clearly communicating back to communication. It was communicating with the team and creating the one sheet or kind of the run of show of what they were kind of going to because every event was different, making sure they had the right supplies and that we had these kind of supply kits and equipment bins, making sure that they had the right vehicle. We had station vehicles they had to drive to the event. And then making sure the client was happy or the account manager was happy, or the radio DJ, the talent going was happy. And then kind of being creative about, we would sit around with clients sometimes in these large brainstorming sessions and we would kind of be like, well, the sky's the limit, what do you want us to, what can we do to help the client? And being in promotions, being the one executing these events, my job was sometimes to make sure everything was manageable to actually do in real life because sometimes things were just going to be not really, we couldn't really do them. So we had to kind of be solutions orientated, but also be realistic in what we were able to do. So that was great training being in radio. And that was, I probably was involved in, I don't know, 800 events or something during my
Oh my
time at those radio
gosh.
stations. Yeah.
That
So I
is a
was there.
lot.
Yeah. So a lot of events. But I think that during that time, I was also during sometimes I would even use vacation time to work for film festivals because I wanted to kind of continue the film festival trajectory. So I was still kind of doing that on the side. I ended up moving to New York. Then I worked for Showtime Networks, which my job was in digital. It was in kind of digital editorial content. So it wasn't as much in the event space, but I was definitely around a lot of events and I was around a lot of action in New York. I was there for a little while, but for actually 3.5 years. But what reason I left was working in that world. I kind of wanted to go back to the events more so in a larger capacity than what I had there. So even though Showtime sounded like a great job, it wasn't really matching my interests, I think eventually I figured out. So from there, I ended up working for like dozens of film festivals across the country for like a 2 or 3 year period where I was kind of like a carny, but for film festivals. And I literally worked every role almost that you could have of being a part of a film festival. So I was like the ticketing and credential manager, or the production manager, or the theater operations manager. Or I one time had to actually become the kind of the guest service, manager for one of the festivals. And then I kind of worked my way up the ladder, and then eventually I became the producer of a few different film festivals, which was, I guess, the pinnacle of the film, I don't know, film festival world. Some fun experiences though. I got to work for Showtime, not Showtime, Sundance. I got to work for the Sundance Film Festival, which actually is going on right around now, actually out there in Park City, Utah. And that was a fun time. And then Tribeca, of course, the Tribeca Film Festival. But I kind of enjoyed working for some of the smaller, more like regional festivals where, kind of a mini community forums for a week or so. And everyone's wearing their lanyards and credentials and walking around and talking to each other. And then I think on the event side, the film festival team who's traveling in from different places really becomes a close, well, hopefully they become a close unit together, especially if everyone's, kind of traveling in from somewhere else. You kind of hang out together and you do everything together for, a couple weeks. And you feel like you're best friends, and then you all leave and go your separate ways.
Yeah, yeah. You don't have to answer this, but I'm curious, now that you've done everything, like literally from the bottom to the top of film festivals, you've rolled up your sleeves, you've seen it all. Is there anything, any job where you're like, that was really like the worst thing I had to do and I never want to do it again?
Well, there are parts of the jobs that were definitely the worst, that were very challenging, I will say. Being the ticketing and credential manager or the box office manager of the festival, I've actually renamed one time I produced a festival, I renamed that position like box office and customer service manager, because really everyone who interacts with the festival is going to go through the box office to interact. So I was fielding. I mean, my inbox. I think they didn't. Yeah, I didn't have a phone for that festival, so there was just like email. Contact the box office via email. So every day I would get like hundreds and hundreds of emails that I would have to answer almost just by myself or forward them off to someone. So it was just inundated by emails, and uh, that was a little tricky. And then working, especially you have a ticketing system usually you have to work with, and kind of figuring out like how to work with a kind of a complex ticketing system and printing out credentials that all have different privileges on them, and that's difficult. And then any problem usually gets directed to you, especially if someone has a question, about something. So that's why, yeah, you end up kind of figuring out better ways to do things. That's why like those like, FAQ pages are really good for film festivals or events, and pointing people to different, scan this QR code and you can hopefully find your answer to things like that sort of thing you kind of figure out. But yeah, that's tricky. And then I will say one of the most underappreciated jobs of any film festival is being the production manager, because that means like any movement of any material in a film festival is usually done by the production manager. So they are responsible for moving signage or banners or water or bicycle rack or and all these different things that go into the event. Step and repeats, and it's usually just one person and maybe a couple, PAs or interns with them. So that's a very difficult job and physically demanding. And it's usually, that's when I learned how to make a production schedule. Had to be really, really tight, because you have to make sure that people know where you are and everything is timed out perfectly.
Yeah, you got to live and die by a production schedule, the minute by minute, right?
Minute by, yeah, maybe second by second even.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. Um, all right, I'm going to move on to yet another piece of your career, the political realm. Um, I've got a lot of questions about what it was like to work on one of the most fraught presidential campaigns ever, but that would be a whole other podcast. Um, so I'm not going to go into those questions, but I don't know, maybe I'll steal some time with you because I have a lot of questions about it personally. But is directing political logistics anything like directing events or working in the entertainment industry? Like to me, it seems like the stakes are just so much higher, but maybe, as an outsider, that's incorrect.
I think that's pretty correct. So this is actually anyone who wants to get involved in politics. I literally applied online to a job to work for the Democratic National Convention in 2016, and it was an events related like operations job. And I just applied. I got an interview, then I had another interview, and they hired me. And I think the kind of impression people have of those types of things is like you have to know someone, but I literally, so whatever reason, I applied online and got the job. But I didn't know anything really about the political world before I worked for the Democratic National Convention in 2016. So I was kind of thrown in to manage operations for one of the venues of the convention, and I immediately had to learn a lot of acronyms very quickly. And this was in Philadelphia, so we were working out of the Pennsylvania Convention Center. That was the venue I was assigned to. And funny
So you
enough,
had to manage everything that happened within the convention center?
within so all the operations and all of the different groups that were coming into that convention center. So there's like a daytime venue and a nighttime venue of the convention. So I was in kind of my scope was the daytime venue. So
Oh,
the
that sounds like
nighttime
a
venues,
lot.
what you yeah, so the nighttime venues are kind of the fun stuff you see on TV. The daytime venues where the business of the party happens, where the caucus and council meetings happen, more of like traditional when you think of like meeting management, working at a convention center, it's more of that stuff. And the problem that the convention has, and I had, is when you're working with a convention like that, you're usually working with one of their convention service managers who's used to like trade shows coming in, and these trade shows usually plan their events, a year ahead of time, and they have a very very firm timeline they stick to. The very nature of a political event is that things are very last minute, and you can't, and changes happen last minute. So you can imagine when you're working with unions and you're working with things that have to be planned at a certain time in advance, and you just can't plan them that far in advance. There were some coordinating communication issues that just naturally happen given an event like that. Again, with kind of the communication skills and relationship building, there's a lot of that goes into working in a environment like that, because you're working alongside people who have just never worked with a last minute event coming in like that. And then there's certain moving parts of a convention that don't move at the same speed as maybe like other political events would move. So there was a lot of I had to learn, and also I literally drew a map of the convention and all the space allocations by hand and put it on my wall, because we didn't have any like event management software to use at the time. So but I needed to like plan all that out. And it was very helpful visually for me to look at it in my office. So I had this big map of the convention, and I had little post-it notes that were all the room allocations of all the groups we were giving the rooms to, just so I could track them. And then I think I also wrote like a organizational chart of the convention and put that on my wall too, because there were so many people and I didn't know who was connected to who. So just to kind of get my bearings quickly. So people kind of laughed when they would walk by my office and saw that on my wall. But then people would look at it and it would help them too. So because it was just one of those things. But yeah, so that was a very interesting job. I think I've also worked on political campaigns, and those are a little different because those are like, in the political world, people who do events, it's called advanced, because they're advanced. They go in and before the candidate or the principal gets there, and they set up the event and they make sure that everything is set in stone. And I think there is a little bit more of a serious component to it. You're working a lot more with like high level security as well. And then the principal or the candidate who comes and their team usually have a certain set of expectations that need to be met. And then all the last minute components that you just can't plan for. So you have to really kind of be flexible, and the best line I heard in politics is to take things seriously but not personally, which I thought was pretty good advice, because in politics there's just a lot of big personalities, and there's a lot of so you just kind of have to be very solutions orientated, and just count on there being last minute changes, which is, I guess that's also with events, but even more so with these political events. There's always last minute changes. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I once did an event with the head of state of Bulgaria, and we had been petitioning, with his working with his team for him to join an event for months, and they kept not committing. And then the night before, like you said, last minute, they were like, okay, he's coming. So then all of us, I had a team of five at the time, dropped everything we were doing because we had to figure out like what is a security protocol to get our 600 attendees into the venue the next morning and the Bulgarian president in the next morning. And it was a wild ride. I've since then worked with a lot of other politicians, but I do think that there's something uh, about a U.S. presidential candidate that brings a layer that even sort of similar head of state positions that other head of states maybe don't have. Some are a little bit more laid back, but in the U.S. we take that very, very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I think any event that's involving, the Secret Service and also law enforcement entities. So the last convention I worked in 2024, I created an access control plan for the venue I was assigned to, and a
Can you
lot
tell
of
our
that.
listeners what an access control plan is?
Sure. It is a plan of basically what credential allows entry into a certain part of the building or a certain area of the building and what levels of access gain entry. And so basically, think of walking into an event if you're wearing a credential, and that credential allows you to go inside to the event through the security perimeter, is what it's called, the perimeter. So, and oftentimes there's multiple different levels of access. So, like you might be able to go through the first set of gates into the event, but you might not be able to go right backstage or into a certain back of house area of the convention center. You might need another layer of access or another type of badge to get you into that. So it's kind of creating that plan and then communicate. More importantly, is the communication of that plan to all of the different law enforcement agencies, the volunteers who might be standing at the door looking at things and just making sure everyone knows kind of what the plan is. And it can be very tricky, especially if you're working with, different law enforcement agencies that don't maybe communicate as much to one another, or you're dealing with, then your own volunteers. And I think people listening might, there's always some volunteers can be a little overzealous of like wanting to stop people. So we actually had training that I led to help advise everyone like, instead of like I would tell people, don't stop people yourself. Try, but if you see somebody who shouldn't, be where they should be, get somebody else who's on staff to go over and assist. So kind of like those types of things. But yeah, the stakes really are higher, and that it was kind of nice after working the first convention, going back to working a film festival because I'm like, at the end of the day, this is just a film festival. So yes, we're not electing a president here, which
Right.
I don't know if people like to hear or not, but like, it's kind of true. I mean, there are different levels of different types of events, and every event is important to somebody, I know. But from like a national interest standpoint, the conventions were pretty important, are pretty important.
Right. And at a film festival, you also have security concerns because there's a lot of high profile celebrities there. Some celebrities maybe are not as high profile, but act as though they are. But I'm sure that there are a lot of similar considerations that you carry between one and the other.
Yeah, and I mean at the Tribeca Film Festival, I mean a lot of retired NYPD police officers and detectives are part of their security team. So because and also a lot of film festivals are sometimes under terrorist threats,
Right.
and they have to deal with those issues as well. And I think in LA, I worked for one film festival. I think they had like seven world premieres. It was during the AFI Film Festival. It's called AFI Fest, and we had all these, red carpets, and there were just like celebrities everywhere. And that was when I learned about like there's like the after party, and then there's like the A-list after party, and there's like the different layers of after parties based on like how VIP people are, what
Yeah.
level of VIP status. So yeah, there's a lot of security concerns, and also, I mean, honestly, some film festival patrons can be also a little overzealous in terms of
Mhm.
like wanting to get into a oversold house, or wanting to push through security. And there's definitely been some situations that I've dealt with that have involved some very angry people attending film festivals, and that's part of like that goes into the training for the event training for everyone, that what to do in that situation, right? And
Right.
who to call and how to respond.
Right. Right. A line in your LinkedIn profile that struck me was this one for your work with the 2024 DNC. Successfully managed communications for logistical event elements and interfaced between all teams on site. So, like at its surface, it seems like a very simple like bullet, like this is something I did, check, check, check. But this is the crux of being an extraordinary event manager. So if I'm understanding your experience correctly, excellent communication is seems to be your key strength. You've got a lot of strengths, obviously, but from just the way you write your LinkedIn profile, number one, to the way you articulate yourself, you have the strategic communication degree, but it just seems like to you, for, speaking as somebody from the outside, I'm under the impression that to you, communication is like the basic thing that you have to have in order to do these things successfully. Am I wrong? I would love to hear your thoughts a little bit about this and like what valuable lessons you've learned up to this point in your career about communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's breaking things down into little pieces that people can understand. A good example of this is, and goes into like the CMP training, like think of like the pre-con meeting, and I was in just last year a couple pre-con meetings with some of the big hotels that were connected to the convention center where you're in front of their whole team and all the different departments of the hotel, and then you have people from your staff there. And I would get up and I was asked to talk about the security piece of how people could get into the venue and the access control piece. And I think, I don't want to say like fake it till you make it, but in a sense, like you want to project confidence when you speak, right? And even though I didn't know the ins and outs of every security procedure we had, I was kind of the spokesperson in that moment. So I was in my thoughts and I kind of my bullets of what I was going to talk about, my talking points. I got those down. So I think a part of this is like thinking about like what are your talking points that you can easily share with other people and also kind of answer automatically when asked on the fly. And then the kind of the breaking down of information. And I think with events, people naturally, a lot of people, they just get very anxious about events and they get very nervous about events. So kind of projecting a calmness when you communicate is, I think, important because then that will hopefully, not always, but hopefully calm the other person down a little bit. And then being transparent is also important, being especially with like a political convention, like people might not trust what you're saying, but when you're working with vendors and you have to kind of talk to people on a human level for them to really build trust and for them. I mean, I did in 2020 tell the operations VP at the Wisconsin Center that President Biden wasn't coming to Milwaukee to accept the nomination. He was going to stay in Delaware because of the pandemic, and I had to kind of break that news to him. But which was horrible because then he basically half of his staff, he had to kind of tell if they didn't need them, right? But because of the relationship that we had built together, we had a certain level of trust that when I told him that, he was just kind of, I mean, he wasn't happy, but he was like, okay, we actually went out for a beer to talk about it. Because like, but he wasn't mad at me because he knew that I was doing my best to communicate with him. So I think that relationship building that goes into it first is important as well. So like all those, it's relationships, it's being transparent, it's communicating kind of clearly, maybe rehearsing the talking points a little bit in advance, and then kind of being calm and trying to maintain kind of at least an image of confidence, especially when you're speaking at something like a pre-con. And then, being open to people afterwards, people might want to come up to you and exchange cards or numbers, and being responsive. Like I might be a little OCD about this one thing, but I always respond to like every email, any text message I get from anyone. And not everyone does that, and that's something that just for me is really important. Even if it's just to say like, I don't know, I'll try to get an answer, but I don't know at the moment. Like just even that, I think helps people because if you don't respond at all, I just feel like it doesn't help with communicating. So I try to really be responsive in that way.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, we have reached the end here, and I'm going to ask
Oh,
you our closing question. I know I could have come up with a lot of other questions. I'm really enjoying listening to your stories and to your experience. But um, what is the coolest event that you've been to, either as an attendee or as the planner or producer?
So just because of the wow factor, when I worked in radio, I got to be a part of a really cool thing. I don't know if Disney World still does this, but Disney World did a radio week where they would take radio DJs from their like top markets and bring them down to Disney World, and they would broadcast live for the week from Disney World. And I went with our midday radio DJ as like the producer because I was in promotions because she was allowed to take one person. So they brought us down there and they literally wined and dined us all week because they wanted to make sure that the radio broadcast sounded good to everybody listening back in Philadelphia. So they treated us like royalty. I mean, but I got to really experience also the way that Disney does events. And Disney, I think of all the events I've seen, I mean, they're like they know how to do events. I mean, every detail of everything was so well orchestrated. There's actually a I don't know if you remember this show, Dinner Impossible, but there was a taping of Dinner Impossible at Epcot Center for us one night. So they literally closed the theme park down in Epcot. We had the taping of the show, we were extras in it, and then we could walk around Epcot and go on rides, just like a private like night at Epcot. So just it wasn't one event, but that whole experience of the week. We had a personal guide assigned to us just for like the three of us for that week that kind of like was our hands-on person throughout the week to answer any questions. They made everything so easy and nice. So kind of being a guest, being their guest, it taught me like how to treat people on events that I run. Like having that contact person or having breaking making things really nice and having a little gift in the hotel room when they arrive or little details like that can really make or break an experience that somebody has with your event, especially if you're trying to, wine and dine them. So that was definitely the biggest wow factor I've ever had on an event before.
I love it. I have a couple reactions. Number one,
Yeah.
I've been doing this podcast almost 3 years now, and everybody's got a different answer, but you are not the first person to say a Disney event. That is like, I mean, I just I think it's a testament to how hard working Disney is like the hardest working in the whole industry for sure. Number one. Number two, I would love to interview if any of our listeners work at Disney or know somebody who does events at Disney who would be interested in being interviewed, I would die to even if they don't want to be interviewed, but they're willing to talk to me, I just absolutely love to hear what that's like. And number three, I have been so deeply interested in this Disney experience for so long that like I think that that would be the absolute only thing that could bring me to Florida is being an event planner for Disney. Because it just, I'm sure it's an absolutely insane job because I mean, you've got to cross your T's and dot your I's repeatedly, and I'm sure that it's an extremely high stress job, but I mean, from the outside, what an experience it must be to be able to give people those types of experiences.
Yeah. And that thing for me though is since that was such an amazing week in Disney World, I'm afraid to ever go back again because it's never going to be that good. They're never going to close the theme park for me. So I think I just want to like have that in my mind forever of
Right.
Disney World. Hey, can I give a one more I want to give a recommendation if I
Yeah,
can
please.
about and maybe you've read it but this is a great book, The Art of Gathering. It's by Priya Parker. It's called The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters. And it's a book I read, I think like a year ago or so, but it really kind of, I mean, a lot of it, if you're an event professional, you can relate with, but she really kind of breaks things down into like really why an event matters. I think why it matters is like the key part. So I would highly recommend that book to anyone. It's also a really easy read and kind of a fun read too.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you for that recommendation. I want to build on that. I can't believe it's never occurred to me to recommend books on this podcast. Unreasonable Hospitality. I've read that almost immediately after reading The Art of Gathering years ago, because I was like, oh, this was so good. I want to like absorb all of, consume all that I can. And Unreasonable Hospitality, of course, is restaurant based. It's about 11 Madison Park. But it is it just gave me so many invaluable ideas on how to make your event attendees and guests feel really special. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to put that on my list.
Yeah. And that's also an easy read. It was like maybe a couple hundred pages. So, Liam, thank you so much. I have so enjoyed this conversation. For those who want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go for more information?
Well, they could go to find me on LinkedIn, or I mean, they can also, I guess, send me an email.
Okay.
Maybe,
We will link to your LinkedIn, and if people want
yeah,
to get in touch with you, we'll
yeah,
we'll do they'll
I'm
do
there.
that. Okay,
Well, thank you,
great.
Dora, for having me, and it's been kind of an honor to be on your program, and thank you for all you do for the events industry.
No problem. Thank you. That's really nice of you to say. Thank you. And thank you to all of our dear listeners and Meeting Protocol fans for checking out this episode. Don't forget to go to meetingprotocol.org where you can sign up for our newsletter. That includes links to all of our new podcasts, a CMP tip of the month, and tons of resources for all things related to meeting professionals in CMP. Thanks again.
Thanks.